Robert Chen was tired to the bone. The kind of tired that seeps into your body after too many late nights and early mornings. His eyes burned from staring at spreadsheets and his back ached from hours in uncomfortable chairs. At 46, he had more money than he could spend in 3 lifetimes. But days like today made him wonder if it was worth it. Flight 87 to Los Angeles, now boarding first-class passengers. Robert grabbed his leather briefcase and stood up. The Singapore business trip had been cut short when his main investor, Mr. Tanaka, suddenly came down with pneumonia. 3 days of meetings canceled just like that. Part of him was relieved. He could finally go home, sleep in his own bed, and maybe even take a day off. As the plane soared over the Pacific, Robert tried to sleep but couldn't. His mind kept racing with thoughts about the new tech his company was developing. They were close to a breakthrough that could change everything. If they pulled it off, his $300 million fortune would double, maybe triple. Not that he needed more money. What he needed was, well, he wasn't sure anymore. 14 hours later, the plane touched down in Los Angeles. Robert checked his phone as soon as he could. 27 new emails, 15 text messages, and 5 missed calls. He ignored them all and called his driver. "Hey Frank, it's me. I'm back early. Can you pick me up?" "Mr. Chen." "Of course, sir. I'll be there in 30 minutes. Robert waited at the pickup area, watching families reunite. A little boy ran into his father's arms. A couple kissed like they'd been apart for years, not hours. He looked away. It had been 3 years since the divorce, but seeing happy couples still stung. Frank pulled up in the black Bentley. "Good to see you, sir." "How was Singapore?" "Short," Robert replied, settling into the back seat. "Let's go home." "And Frank? I don't want to talk. It's been a long flight." "Understood, sir." The drive to Robert's mansion in the hills took almost an hour in LA traffic. He stared out the window, watching the city transform from concrete and billboards to palm trees and gated communities. His house sat at the end of a private road, surrounded by carefully landscaped gardens and a 10-foot security fence. As they approached the gate, Robert frowned. Something wasn't right. There were lights on in the east wing of the house, his bedroom wing. He hadn't told anyone he was coming home early. The staff wasn't supposed to be there. His housekeeper, Mrs. Diaz, only came Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. Today was Tuesday. Frank stopped the car. "Sir, just stop here. I see lights on in my house. I want to check the security system." Robert pulled out his phone and opened the security app. Everything seemed normal, no alerts. He switched to the live camera feeds. The front door, the back garden, the pool area, all clear. But when he checked the kitchen camera, he froze. Someone was in his kitchen. Not just someone, Mrs. Diaz, and she wasn't cleaning. She was cooking. Music played in the background and she swayed to the beat while stirring something on the stove. The timestamp on the video showed she'd been there for over 3 hours. "Sir, is everything okay?" Frank's voice snapped Robert back to reality. "I'm not sure," he muttered. "Mrs. Diaz is in the house. She's not supposed to be here today. Maybe she's preparing something for your return tomorrow," Frank suggested. "Maybe." But Robert didn't believe that. Mrs. Diaz was extremely professional. In the 5 years she'd worked for him, she'd never once deviated from her schedule without asking first. "Drive up to the house, Frank, but stay in the car until I call you." As they pulled into the circular driveway, Robert noticed more details that bothered him. The guest house lights were on too. And was that a bicycle leaning against the garage wall? A child's bicycle? "Wait here," he told Frank as he got out. "If I'm not back in 10 minutes, call security." Robert walked quietly to the front door, his key ready. He entered his security code and slipped inside. The marble foyer was spotless as always, but now he could clearly hear music coming from the kitchen. And smells, so many smells. Bread baking, something spicy simmering, the sweet scent of cake or cookies. He moved silently through the house, past his rarely used living room with its designer furniture and expensive art. As he neared the kitchen, he could hear Mrs. Diaz humming along to the music. It was a side of her he'd never seen before. At work, she was always quiet, efficient, and formal. "Yes, Mr. Chen." "No, Mr. Chen." "Will there be anything else, Mr. Chen?" Robert paused at the kitchen door, suddenly feeling like an intruder in his own home. What was she doing? Was she stealing from him? Using his house for some kind of business? He'd trusted her with everything, his home, his privacy, his security codes. Had she been taking advantage all along? Only one way to find out. He pushed open the door. The scene that greeted him was so unexpected that for a moment he just stared. His massive kitchen, a showcase of stainless steel appliances and marble countertops that he almost never used himself, had been transformed. Every surface was covered with food in different stages of preparation. A huge pot bubbled on the stove. Vegetables were laid out on cutting boards. A cake cooled on a rack. And in the middle of it all was Mrs. Diaz, her black hair loose instead of in its usual tight bun, dancing while she mixed something in a bowl. She turned, saw him, and the bowl slipped from her hands, clattering to the floor. Batter splattered everywhere. "Mr. Chen," she gasped, her face draining of color. You're not supposed to be home." Robert had never seen her flustered before. In 5 years, she'd always been calm and collected, even when he'd been at his worst, shouting about a misplaced document or returning home drunk after a bad day. "Clearly," he said coldly. "What exactly are you doing in my kitchen, Mrs. Diaz?" She knelt to pick up the fallen bowl, her hands shaking. "I can explain, sir, please. I was going to clean everything up. You weren't supposed to be back until Friday." "That doesn't answer my question." Robert walked further into the kitchen, taking in the scope of what she'd done. It wasn't just cooking. It looked like she was preparing for a party. "Are you using my house for some kind of catering business?" No, sir. I would never." She stood up, still holding the empty bowl like a shield. It's for my family. Your family." He looked around again. "Are they here too? In my house?" Mrs. Diaz bit her lip, looking more nervous than he'd ever seen her. "Not in the main house, sir. I would never allow that." They're in the guest house." Robert felt his temper rising. The guest house? He hadn't set foot in there for months, but it was still his property. "You moved your family into my guest house without asking? How long has this been going on?" "Just 3 days, sir. It's an emergency situation. My sister's apartment building had a major water leak. The whole place is flooded, and they had nowhere else to go. The children needed..." "Children?" Robert cut her off. "There are children staying in my guest house?" "My sister's children, yes. 5 of them." Mrs. Diaz straightened her shoulders slightly. "I know I should have asked first, Mr. Chen. It was wrong of me not to. But you were overseas, and it was late at night when they called me. They had nowhere else to go." Robert ran a hand through his hair, trying to process this information. 5 children? In his perfectly maintained guest house with its white furniture and glass tables, he could already imagine the damage. "How old are these children?" he asked. "The youngest is 4, the oldest is 14, Mrs. Diaz replied. She seemed to be regaining some of her composure. "I promise you, sir, they are well behaved. I've made sure they understand they must respect your property." Robert walked to the window that overlooked the back garden and the guest house beyond. He could see more lights now and movement behind the curtains. "And all this food?" He gestured to the chaos in the kitchen. "I'm preparing meals for the week. My sister is working double shifts to save for a new apartment. I thought it would help them to have proper meals ready." She hesitated. "I was going to clean everything spotless before you returned. The children haven't touched anything in the main house. I would never abuse your trust like that." Robert stared at her, trying to decide if he believed her. Mrs. Diaz had been the perfect employee for years. Reliable, discreet, honest. She'd never given him any reason to doubt her before. But this was a major breach of trust. "I want to see," he said finally. "Take me to the guest house now." Mrs. Diaz nodded quickly. "Of course, sir." She wiped her hands on her apron, then seemed to realize she was still wearing it. She untied it with fumbling fingers. "I'm sorry about the mess. I'll clean everything as soon as we return." "The mess can wait," Robert said, his voice tight. "I want to see exactly what's been happening on my property while I've been gone." As they walked toward the door, Mrs. Diaz paused. "Mr. Chen, will you let me explain to the children first, so they're not frightened? They've been through a lot this week." Robert looked at her, really looked at her for perhaps the first time in 5 years. He saw the worry lines around her eyes, the gray strands in her dark hair, the way she held herself with dignity even now, when she'd been caught breaking the rules. He thought about what it must have taken for someone as proper as Mrs. Diaz to make this decision, to risk her job for her family. "Fine," he said, "but I want the truth, Mrs. Diaz, all of it." "Yes, sir," she replied quietly. "You'll have it. The walk from the main house to the guest house took less than 2 minutes, but to Robert it felt much longer. The night air was cool against his face, a welcome relief from the stuffiness of international flights and the tension of the kitchen confrontation. Mrs. Diaz walked slightly ahead of him, her posture stiff, her footsteps quick on the stone path. "I've been working for you for 5 years," she said suddenly, breaking the silence. "I've never taken so much as a paperclip without permission. I need you to know that." Robert didn't answer. He was still processing everything. Part of him was furious at the invasion of his privacy, but another part was curious. In all the years Mrs. Diaz had worked for him, he realized he knew almost nothing about her life outside his home. As they approached the guest house, Mrs. Diaz turned to him. "Please, Mr. Chen, give me 2 minutes to explain to the children before you come in." Robert nodded stiffly. 2 minutes. He watched as she hurried inside, closing the door behind her. Through the windows he could see movement, hear muffled voices. He checked his watch. 2 minutes exactly. Then he walked to the door and knocked. Mrs. Diaz opened it, her face composed but her eyes worried. "They're ready, sir." Robert stepped into the guest house and stopped short. He'd expected chaos. Toys everywhere, furniture damaged, the general mess that he associated with children. Instead, the space was almost painfully neat. The living area had been transformed into a makeshift bedroom and study space. Neatly made pallets lined one wall. A folding table in the center was covered with textbooks and notebooks, all arranged in tidy stacks. And then there were the children. 5 of them, standing in a row from tallest to shortest like a miniature army, all with Mrs. Diaz's dark eyes, all watching him with a mixture of fear and curiosity. The oldest, a teenage girl, stepped forward. "Good evening, Mr. Chen. I'm Lucia. These are my brothers and sisters, Thomas, Isabel, Mateo, and Gabriela." Each child nodded when their name was called. "We're very sorry for using your house without permission. It was an emergency. We promise we haven't damaged anything." Robert was taken aback by her poise. The girl couldn't be more than 14, but she spoke with the gravity of someone much older. "It's my fault, not theirs," Mrs. Diaz said quickly. "I made the decision." The youngest child, who looked about 4, broke ranks and ran to Mrs. Diaz, wrapping her arms around her aunt's legs. "Are we in trouble, Tia Rosa? Do we have to leave?" Mrs. Diaz stroked the little girl's hair. "Let's let Mr. Chen look around first, Gabriela." She looked up at Robert. "Please, sir, if you want to see that nothing's been damaged." Robert moved further into the guest house, inspecting as he went. The kitchen area was spotless. The bathroom had clearly been used. There were toothbrushes in a cup, small towels hanging neatly, but it was clean. What struck him most was how little space they had. 7 people sharing a guest house meant for 2 was like sardines in a can. "Where do you all sleep?" he asked, genuinely curious. The middle boy, who looked around 10, pointed to the pallets. "Tia Rosa sleeps there by the door. The girls sleep together on that one. Thomas and I share that one." His voice was earnest. "We're very quiet at night so Mama can sleep when she gets home." "Your mother doesn't stay here?" "She works night shifts at the hospital," the oldest girl explained. "She's a cleaning supervisor. She comes here to sleep in the mornings after we go to school, then goes back for her second job in the afternoons." 2 jobs? Robert couldn't help asking. Mrs. Diaz nodded. "My sister is trying to save enough for a security deposit on a new apartment. The building manager said it might be weeks before their old place is habitable again. The water damage destroyed most of their furniture." She hesitated. Their rent was increasing anyway. They were planning to move when the lease ended next month. Robert noticed a stack of textbooks on the table. "Are those all yours?" he asked, addressing the children. The oldest boy, who looked about 12, nodded. "Yes, sir. Tia Rosa makes us do our homework as soon as we get home from school. She checks it before we can watch TV." Robert picked up one of the notebooks and flipped through it. Math problems, all completed, all checked with red pen. Another notebook contained an essay on photosynthesis, with Mrs. Diaz's neat handwriting offering corrections and suggestions in the margins. "You help them with their homework?" he asked Mrs. Diaz. "Of course." She seemed surprised by the question. "Education is important. My sister works so hard to give them opportunities. I try to help where I can." Robert looked around again. A small stack of board games sat in the corner. A few books were lined up on the windowsill. A hand-drawn picture of what appeared to be the family was taped to the wall. It was sparse, but it was clearly a home, not just a temporary shelter. "Where are your toys?" he asked the youngest girl who was still clinging to Mrs. Diaz's legs. At our house, she replied solemnly. The water monster ate them. The flood, Mrs. Diaz explained quietly. They had to leave most things behind. We salvaged some clothes, school supplies, a few books. Robert nodded, his mind working. He was still angry about the breach of trust, but it was harder to direct that anger at Mrs. Diaz now. He'd seen how she lived, how she cared for her family. It was a side of her he'd never known existed. Mr. Chen, Mrs. Diaz said, her voice steady but with an edge of desperation. I know I've broken your trust. I'm prepared to face the consequences. But please, can they stay here until my sister finds a new place? It won't be more than a few weeks. The children were all watching him now, their eyes wide. The oldest girl had her arm around her youngest sister protectively. Even in their fear, Robert noted, they were perfectly behaved. No whining, no running around, no begging. Where's your mother now? He asked. At work, the oldest boy replied. She's on duty until 7 a.m. Robert checked his watch. Just past 10 p.m. And who watches you when Mrs. Diaz is at my house working? Lucia takes care of us, the middle girl piped up. She knows how to cook and help with homework and everything. I'm almost 15, Lucia said, lifting her chin slightly. I've been helping with my siblings since I was 10. Robert raised an eyebrow, impressed despite himself. At 15, he'd been concerned with video games and avoiding homework. This girl was practically an adult already. Sir, Mrs. Diaz said quietly, if you prefer, I can stay here with them and come to work only when their mother is home. I can work nights and weekends to make up the hours, or... She took a deep breath. If you need to let me go, I understand. But please, give us a few days to find somewhere else to stay. Robert looked at Mrs. Diaz. Really looked at her. In 5 years, she'd never asked him for anything. Never complained when he tracked mud across a freshly mopped floor. Never commented when he left dishes crusting in the sink for days. Never was anything but professional even when he was at his worst. Hungover, rude, dismissive. Mrs. Diaz, how much does your sister make at her 2 jobs? The question seemed to surprise her. I'm not sure exactly. Maybe $3,000 a month combined, why? And how much is rent for a decent 3-bedroom apartment in a safe neighborhood? Mrs. Diaz hesitated. At least $2,500 a month plus security deposit. That's why she's working double shifts. She needs to save up first and last month's rent plus the deposit. Robert did the math quickly in his head. Even if her sister saved every penny, it would take months to afford a new place. And that wasn't accounting for food, utilities, school supplies, and all the other expenses of raising 5 children. He made a decision. You can stay, he said abruptly. Mrs. Diaz's eyes widened. Sir? You can all stay here until your sister finds a suitable place. He gestured around the guest house. But this is too small for 7 people. Tomorrow we'll clear out the pool house. It has 3 bedrooms and a proper kitchen. The pool house? Mrs. Diaz looked stunned. But that's your entertainment space, Robert shrugged. I haven't entertained anyone in months. Maybe years, it was true. Since the divorce, he'd retreated from social life almost entirely. It's just collecting dust. Mr. Chen, I don't know what to say. Mrs. Diaz's voice trembled slightly. This is incredibly generous. It's temporary, Robert said firmly, not wanting to seem too soft. And there will be rules. The children stay in the pool house area only. No running around the main grounds. No noise after 9 p.m., and you'll continue your regular duties. Of course, sir. Mrs. Diaz nodded quickly. We'll be so quiet you won't even know we're here. The children were staring at Robert with varying expressions of surprise and relief. The youngest one had her thumb in her mouth now, her big eyes peering at him over her hand. Thank you, Mr. Chen, Lucia said formally. We promise to follow all your rules. Robert nodded awkwardly. He wasn't used to gratitude. Most people in his life, employees, business partners, even his ex-wife, had always wanted more from him no matter what he gave. Mrs. Diaz, finish whatever you need to in the kitchen, then lock up the main house. We'll sort out the pool house tomorrow. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. As Robert turned to leave, the youngest child suddenly darted forward and hugged his legs. Thank you for saving us from the water monster, she said seriously. Startled, Robert patted her head awkwardly. You're welcome. Walking back to the main house alone, Robert felt strange. The anger that had driven him earlier had dissipated, replaced by something he couldn't quite identify. It wasn't happiness exactly. More like purpose? It had been a long time since he'd done something that mattered to someone else, something that wasn't about making money or closing a deal. He stopped halfway and looked back at the guest house. Through the window, he could see the children gathered around Mrs. Diaz, all talking excitedly at once. Even from this distance, he could sense their relief, their joy at not having to leave. For the first time in years, Robert Chen felt like he might have made the right decision. Robert woke up the next morning to the unfamiliar sound of laughter. For a moment, he lay in bed, disoriented. His bedroom was on the second floor of the east wing, far from any street noise. The only sounds he usually heard were birds or the occasional gardener's equipment. But this was definitely children's laughter. Then he remembered Mrs. Diaz and her family. He checked the time, 7:30 a.m. Later than he usually woke up, but after the long flight and yesterday's surprise, he'd slept deeply for the first time in weeks. He got up and went to the window. From here, he could see part of the garden and the pool area. Mrs. Diaz was there with the children, who were lined up as she handed each a backpack and what looked like a lunch bag. School day routine, he realized. He'd never seen this side of his housekeeper's life. After a quick shower, Robert headed downstairs. The house was immaculate as always, with no sign of last night's cooking extravaganza. He walked into the kitchen to find fresh coffee waiting and a covered plate on the island. A note sat beside it in Mrs. Diaz's neat handwriting. "Breakfast, if you're hungry. I'll be back after dropping the children at school. R. Diaz." Robert lifted the cover to find a simple but perfect omelet, still warm, with toast and sliced fruit on the side. In 5 years, Mrs. Diaz had never cooked for him unless he specifically asked, and even then it was usually just reheating something he'd ordered in. He ate at the kitchen island, looking out at the pool house as he did. It was a substantial building, designed for entertaining. Inside was a full kitchen, 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, and a large living area with a bar and entertainment system. He'd used it a few times for business parties in the early days, but it had been empty for at least 2 years now. His phone rang as he was finishing breakfast. It was his assistant, Philip. "Mr. Chen, I've got the team waiting for the video call. They're eager to hear about the Singapore meetings." Robert had completely forgotten about the call. "Tell them it's postponed until tomorrow. Something's come up at the house that I need to deal with. Sir, is everything okay?" "Everything's fine. I just need a day to sort some things out. Reschedule the call and handle any emergencies. I'll check emails later." After hanging up, Robert stared at his phone for a moment. He'd never postponed a business meeting for a personal matter before. His ex-wife used to complain that he'd miss his own funeral if there was a deal on the table. But right now, the thought of sitting through hours of video calls seemed unbearable. He walked out to the pool house, key in hand. Inside, it was dusty but otherwise perfect. High-end furniture, top-of-the-line appliances, plush carpet. Far nicer than any apartment Mrs. Diaz's sister could hope to afford. As he was examining the space, he heard the back door of the main house open and close, then footsteps crossing the patio. Mrs. Diaz appeared in the doorway, looking hesitant. "Mr. Chen, I didn't expect to see you here. I thought you'd be working. I postponed my meetings." He gestured around the space. "I wanted to check what needs to be done to make this livable." Mrs. Diaz stepped inside, her eyes taking in the luxurious surroundings. This is too much, sir. We can't accept this. Why not?" Robert asked, genuinely curious. It's too generous." "We don't want to impose." Robert smiled slightly. "Mrs. Diaz, I have a 12,000 square foot house that I live in alone. This pool house is just sitting empty. It makes no sense for your family to be crammed into the guest house when there's plenty of space here." She looked uncertain. "My sister. She's very proud. She won't want to accept charity." "It's not charity," Robert said, a new idea forming. "It's an arrangement. Your sister works at the hospital cleaning, right? And she has a second job?" Mrs. Diaz nodded. "Yes, she works evening shifts at a grocery store stocking shelves. Between both jobs, she works about 16 hours a day, 6 days a week." Robert frowned. That's not sustainable, especially with 5 children. "What if I offered her a job here instead? I could use a full-time groundskeeper and property manager. The position would come with housing, this pool house. 1 job, decent pay, and no rent to worry about. She could actually see her kids." Mrs. Diaz stared at him, her usual composure slipping. "You would do that? For a family you don't even know?" Robert wasn't entirely sure why he was offering. except that something about the situation had struck a chord with him. Let's call it a business decision. I've been meaning to hire someone to manage the property anyway. This wasn't entirely true, but it sounded better than admitting he was acting on impulse. I don't know what to say, Mr. Chen. Say you'll ask your sister to meet with me tonight after she finishes her shift. Mrs. Diaz nodded slowly. I will, thank you, sir. Now what does this place need? New sheets, food, cleaning supplies? For the next hour they went through the pool house together, making a list. Mrs. Diaz, once she got past her initial shock, proved to be incredibly practical. She knew exactly what her family would need and what they could do without. The children can share bedrooms, she said, as they examined the space. Lucia and Isabel in one, the boys in another, and my sister in the third with Gabriella. And you? Robert asked, realizing she hadn't included herself. I can stay in my apartment. It's only 15 minutes away. She hesitated. Unless... Would you prefer I stay here too to keep an eye on things? That's up to you. There's certainly room. Mrs. Diaz seemed to consider it. It would be easier for the morning routine with the children. And it would save gas money. Then it's settled. You'll all stay here. Robert checked his watch. I need to make some calls. Can you handle getting the supplies we listed? Of course, sir. I'll take care of everything. Robert handed her his credit card. Get whatever you need. Don't skimp. As he turned to leave, Mrs. Diaz called after him. Mr. Chen, why are you doing this? He paused, not sure how to answer. Let's just say I know what it's like to work so hard you never see your family. It doesn't end well. Back in his home office, Robert made several calls to his lawyer, his accountant, and his assistant. By the time he finished, it was mid-afternoon. He wandered back to the kitchen, feeling oddly restless. Usually, he'd be buried in work at this hour, on his third cup of coffee with emails and calls flowing nonstop. The silence felt strange. Outside, he noticed activity at the pool house. Mrs. Diaz was unloading supplies from her small car. Without thinking about it, he went out to help her. Let me get those, he said, taking 2 heavy grocery bags from her arms. She looked startled. Thank you, sir, but you don't have to. I know I don't have to. He picked up another bag. But I want to. Together, they brought everything inside. Mrs. Diaz had bought the essentials: bedding, towels, toiletries, food. She'd even found a few children's books and a set of colored pencils for the younger ones. I hope I didn't spend too much, she said, showing him the receipt. I tried to be economical. Robert barely glanced at the total. It's fine. Did you get everything you need? Yes, I think so. I can start setting up the bedrooms now before the children get home from school. I'll help, Robert offered, surprising himself again. Mrs. Diaz looked as shocked as he felt. Sir, that's not necessary. This is my job, I know, but I want to help. He couldn't explain the urge, even to himself. Maybe it was boredom, or the need to do something concrete after years of dealing with abstract financial figures. Or maybe it was the rare opportunity to do something that would make an immediate difference in someone's life. For the next couple of hours, Robert helped Mrs. Diaz make beds, stock the kitchen, and set up the living area. She was efficient and organized, knowing exactly where everything should go. Robert found himself following her instructions without question, a novel experience for a man used to giving orders, not taking them. You're very good at this, he said as she arranged the kitchen supplies with precision. I've moved 17 times in my life, she replied. You learned to be organized, 17 times? Why so many moves? Mrs. Diaz shrugged slightly. Life happens. My parents moved us from Mexico when I was 12. After that, it was always about finding affordable places, better schools for my sister and me, safer neighborhoods. Then my sister got married, had children, got divorced. More moves. And what about you? No family of your own? A shadow passed over her face. No, it didn't work out that way. Robert sensed he'd touched on a painful subject and changed direction. The children seem very well behaved. Mrs. Diaz's expression softened. They are, especially considering everything they've been through. Their father left 3 years ago. Just walked out one day and never came back. No child support, nothing. My sister has raised them on her own ever since. Robert thought about his own father, who'd been physically present but emotionally absent, always working, always focused on making more money. In some ways, that was worse than a clean break. False hope was more painful than no hope at all. What time will your sister be here? he asked. Around 8. She finishes her hospital shift at 7. Mrs. Diaz hesitated. Mr. Chen, I should warn you. My sister is very independent. She might not want to accept your offer. I can be persuasive when I need to be, Robert replied. It's a good offer. She'd be crazy to refuse it. Mrs. Diaz smiled slightly. Just please understand if she's hesitant. It's not easy to accept help, especially from a stranger. Robert nodded, though he didn't fully understand. In his world, people were always looking for handouts, always trying to get something for nothing. The idea of someone refusing help out of pride was foreign to him. As they finished setting up the pool house, the sound of a school bus stopping at the end of the driveway drifted up to them. That will be the children, Mrs. Diaz said, wiping her hands on a towel. I should go meet them, explain what's happening. Robert felt a sudden nervousness. I'll come with you. She looked surprised but nodded. All right. Together they walked down the long driveway to where 5 children stood at the gate, backpacks slung over their shoulders, looking uncertain about whether they should enter. Come in, Mrs. Diaz called to them. Everything's fine. Mr. Chen has some news for you all. The children approached cautiously, eyeing Robert with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. He cleared his throat, suddenly aware that he had almost no experience talking to children. Your aunt and I have been getting the pool house ready, he said. It's going to be your new home for a while. There's more space there, proper bedrooms. You'll be comfortable. 5 pairs of eyes widened simultaneously. The youngest one, Gabriela, broke into a grin. A swimming pool house? Can we swim in it? For the first time in what felt like years, Robert laughed. Not in it. But maybe in the actual pool sometimes, if it's okay with your mom and your aunt. As they all walked back up the driveway, Robert felt a strange lightness in his chest. Something was changing in his house, in his routine, in himself. He wasn't sure yet if it was good or bad, but at least it was different. And after years of the same lonely existence, different felt like a start. By 8 o'clock that evening, the pool house had been transformed. The children's backpacks hung on hooks by the door. Beds were made with new sheets, and the kitchen was stocked with groceries. The 3 youngest children were already asleep, worn out from the excitement of exploring their new temporary home. Lucia and Thomas sat at the kitchen table doing homework, occasionally glancing at the clock. Robert sat in the living area, feeling oddly nervous. He'd negotiated billion-dollar deals with less anxiety than he felt waiting to meet Mrs. Diaz's sister. Why did this matter so much to him? He wasn't entirely sure. Mrs. Diaz moved around the space with quiet efficiency, adjusting things here and there, checking on the sleeping children. She'd changed from her work uniform into simple jeans and a blouse, her hair loose around her shoulders. Robert realized he'd rarely seen her in anything but her gray housekeeper's uniform. You seem worried, he observed. Mrs. Diaz paused. My sister is complicated. She doesn't like accepting help. It makes her feel like she's failing her children somehow. That's ridiculous, Robert said. Everyone needs help sometimes. Mrs. Diaz gave him a look that made him feel like he'd missed something obvious. With all due respect, Mr. Chen, that's easy to say when you've never had to ask for it. Before Robert could respond, lights swept across the window as a car pulled into the driveway. Mrs. Diaz straightened. That's her. The 2 older children immediately abandoned their homework and ran to the door. Robert stood, smoothing his shirt unnecessarily. He felt like he was about to be interviewed, not the other way around. The door opened and a woman stepped in. She looked like an older, more tired version of Mrs. Diaz. The same dark eyes and delicate features, but with deeper lines around her mouth and eyes. She wore a hospital cleaning staff uniform, and exhaustion hung from her like a visible weight. Mama! The children rushed to hug her. She embraced them, her face softening, then looked beyond them to where Mrs. Diaz and Robert stood. Rosa, what is this place? Your text just said to come to this address after work. Her voice held a trace of an accent less polished than her sister's. Mrs. Diaz stepped forward. Elena, this is Mr. Chen, my employer. Mr. Chen, this is my sister, Elena Vasquez. Robert extended his hand. Ms. Vasquez, it's good to meet you. Elena shook his hand briefly, her expression guarded. What's going on, Rosa? Why are my children here? Perhaps we should sit down, Mrs. Diaz suggested. Gesturing to the living area, the 4 of them sat, the teenagers hovering nearby, clearly not wanting to miss whatever was about to happen. Mr. Chen discovered us staying in the guest house last night, Mrs. Diaz began. You told me that was okay, Elena said, looking alarmed. You said he was away on business. He came home early, Mrs. Diaz explained. But instead of being angry, he's offered to help us. Elena's expression grew more suspicious. Help us how? Robert leaned forward. Ms. Vasquez, your sister has worked for me for 5 years. She's the most reliable, trustworthy person I've ever employed. When I found out about your situation with the apartment flooding, I wanted to help. We don't need charity, Elena said stiffly. It's not charity, Robert replied. It's a job offer. I need a full-time property manager and groundskeeper for this estate. The position includes accommodation. This pool house. 1 job instead of 2, regular hours and no rent to pay. Elena looked stunned. She glanced at her sister, who nodded encouragingly, then back at Robert. Why would you offer a job to someone you don't know? It was a fair question. Robert considered his answer carefully. Because I need someone and your sister vouches for you. That's good enough for me. Elena stood up suddenly and walked to the window, looking out at the illuminated pool and manicured grounds beyond. This isn't real, she murmured. Things like this don't happen to people like us. Mama, Lucia said quietly, I think we should listen to what Mr. Chen is offering. It sounds like a good opportunity. Elena turned back to them. What exactly would this job involve? Managing the grounds, overseeing maintenance of the house and property, handling deliveries, coordinating with other service providers like pool cleaners or plumbers, Robert listed. Basically ensuring everything runs smoothly when I'm traveling, which is often. I know nothing about managing an estate, Elena said bluntly. You manage a household with 5 children while working 2 full-time jobs, Robert countered. I think you can handle this. And your sister will be here to help you learn the ropes. Elena crossed her arms. And the pay? Robert named a figure that was nearly double what she currently earned from both her jobs combined. Elena's eyes widened slightly, but she quickly composed her face. What's the catch? She asked. There's always a catch. The catch is you have to live here on the property. I need someone available most of the time. Robert shrugged. But considering your apartment situation, that doesn't seem like much of a hardship. Elena looked at her sister again. Rosa, what do you think? I think it's an incredible opportunity, Mrs. Diaz said softly. For all of us. The children would have stability, space, good schools nearby. You'd actually get to see them grow up instead of working yourself to death. Lucia stepped forward. Please, Mama, at least try it. Look how happy Gabriela was today. And Mateo and Isabel are already asleep in real beds, not those air mattresses from the shelter. Elena's resolve seemed to waver. She looked around the pool house again, taking in the comfortable furniture, the well-equipped kitchen, the separate bedrooms. For how long? She asked finally. How long could we stay here? Let's start with a 6-month trial period, Robert suggested. If it works out, we can discuss a longer-term arrangement. And if it doesn't work out, then I'll help you find a new apartment and another job. Robert wasn't sure why he was making these promises, but he felt compelled to reassure her. You won't be worse off than you are now. Elena ran her hand through her hair, a gesture so similar to her sister's that Robert couldn't help but notice. I would need to give notice at my jobs, of course. And I would want everything in writing. A proper contract. My lawyer is drawing it up tomorrow. You can have your own lawyer review it if you wish. Elena almost smiled at that. I don't have a lawyer, Mr. Chen, but I know how to read a contract. Then we have a deal? Robert asked, extending his hand again. Elena hesitated one final time, then shook it firmly. We have a deal, but I want to be clear. I will earn my keep. This isn't charity. I wouldn't dream of treating it as such, Robert assured her. Lucia and Thomas, who had been holding their breath during the exchange, broke into wide grins. Does this mean we're staying? Thomas asked. Elena nodded. It seems so, at least for now. The tension in the room dissolved as the teenagers celebrated quietly, mindful of their sleeping siblings. Mrs. Diaz smiled at Robert, a full, genuine smile that he'd never seen before. It transformed her face completely. Thank you, she mouthed silently. Robert nodded, feeling strangely satisfied. He stood up. I should let you all get settled. Elena, take a few days to give notice at your jobs and get your affairs in order. The position will be waiting when you're ready. I can start next Monday, Elena said decisively. I won't leave the hospital without proper notice, but the grocery store will understand. Perfect. I'll have the paperwork ready by then. Robert moved to the door, suddenly eager to give the family some privacy. Good night, everyone. Outside, the night air was cool and clean. Robert stood for a moment looking back at the pool house. Through the windows, he could see the family gathered in the living area, talking animatedly. Mrs. Diaz was hugging her sister. The teenagers were sitting close together on the couch, all smiles and excitement. For a moment, Robert felt a pang of something, not quite envy, not quite loneliness, but a recognition of what was missing from his own life: connection, family, purpose beyond making money. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from Philip. Singapore team asking about rescheduled call. Critical decisions needed for Asia expansion. The real world intruding. Robert sighed and headed back to the main house. He had work to do, calls to make, emails to answer, the usual routine that filled his days but somehow left him empty. As he passed the kitchen, he noticed the dessert Mrs. Diaz had been making last night, now neatly sliced and covered on a plate. Another note sat beside it. Thank you for your kindness. Our Diaz on impulse, Robert took a piece and bit into it. Some kind of spice cake with a hint of cinnamon and nutmeg. It was delicious, homemade in a way he couldn't remember tasting since childhood. His phone buzzed again. Investors getting impatient. Need your decision ASAP. Robert put the phone down without answering and finished the cake instead. The investors could wait until tomorrow. Tonight he'd done something that actually mattered. The next few days passed in a blur of activity. Robert found himself dividing his time between his usual work responsibilities and overseeing the preparations for Elena's family. His lawyer drew up a proper employment contract with fair terms and good benefits. His accountant set up payroll and tax withholding. His assistant, though clearly confused by the sudden interest in household matters, efficiently handled the details. Robert also found himself spending more time around the property than usual. Normally, he worked in his home office or downtown, rarely venturing into the grounds unless he was leaving. Now he found excuses to check on the pool house renovations, to oversee the delivery of additional furniture, to ensure everything was perfect, and he found himself watching the children. They had settled into a routine quickly. School during the day, homework in the afternoons, then free time to explore the grounds or swim in the pool. Robert had never spent much time around children, but he was fascinated by their resilience, their ability to adapt to new circumstances. Little Gabriella, especially, seemed to have adopted him as a special friend. Whenever she spotted him on the property, she would run to show him something: a leaf shaped like a heart, a particularly smooth stone, a drawing she'd made of what she claimed was him, but looked more like a tall stick figure with spiky hair. On the morning Elena was due to start her new job, Robert came downstairs to find Mrs. Diaz preparing breakfast as usual. But this time she wasn't alone. Elena was with her, dressed in neat black pants and a crisp white shirt, looking nervous but determined. "Good morning, Mr. Chen," she said formally. "I'm ready to begin my duties." Robert looked at the two sisters standing side by side in his kitchen and felt an unexpected sense of rightness, as if some missing piece had fallen into place. "Good morning, Elena. Welcome to the team." As he sat down to his usual breakfast, something occurred to him. For the first time in years, he wasn't dreading the day ahead. In fact, he was looking forward to it. Something had shifted in his carefully ordered world, and surprisingly, it didn't feel like an intrusion. It felt like an improvement. 6 months passed more quickly than Robert could have imagined. The seasons changed, summer turned to fall, and the property transformed in ways that went far beyond the weather. What had once been a silent, empty estate now hummed with life. Elena had proven herself to be even more capable than Robert anticipated. She managed the property with efficient grace, quickly learning every aspect of the estate's operations. She had a natural talent for organization and an eye for detail that rivaled her sisters. Within weeks, she had streamlined systems that had been in place for years, saving both time and money. Mrs. Diaz continued her usual duties in the main house, but there was a lightness to her now, a happiness that showed in everything she did. The sisters worked together seamlessly, their different strengths complementing each other perfectly. And the children? The children had blossomed, freed from the constant worry of unstable housing and with their mother actually present in their lives. They thrived. Lucia's grades, already good, became exceptional. Thomas discovered a talent for computers that Robert was quietly nurturing with new equipment. Isabel joined a local soccer team and was quickly becoming a star player. Matteo, once shy and withdrawn, had developed an interest in the garden and spent hours helping with the plants. And little Gabriella, now 5, had appointed herself Robert's special assistant, following him around whenever he was home, asking endless questions about everything from why the sky is blue to how his phone worked. Robert himself had changed perhaps the most of all. He still worked hard, that was in his nature, but he no longer worked all the time. He had dinner with the family at least once a week in the pool house, which Elena insisted upon as a thank you for his generosity. At first, these dinners had been awkward, with the children on their best behavior and conversation stilted. But gradually everyone relaxed. Now the dinners were filled with laughter, stories from school, and lively debates that often continued late into the evening. Today was different, though. Today marked the end of the 6-month trial period they had agreed upon. The contract would need to be renewed or not. Robert had been thinking about it for weeks, considering options, making plans. He was nervous in a way that business dealings never made him feel. He found Elena in the garden, supervising a team of landscapers who were preparing the grounds for winter. She looked different now, still slim but healthier. The constant exhaustion that had marked her face when they first met had been replaced by a calm competence. "Elena, do you have a minute?" he asked. "I'd like to discuss something important." She nodded, gave a few final instructions to the landscapers, and followed him to the stone bench near the rose garden, her favorite spot on the property. "The 6 months are up," Robert began, getting straight to the point. "Yes," Elena replied, her face carefully neutral. "I've been expecting this conversation." "And? What are your thoughts?" Elena looked out over the garden before answering. "My thoughts are that this arrangement has been unexpectedly wonderful. The children are happy, truly happy for the first time in years. I sleep at night instead of working. I actually know what's happening in their lives." She turned to face him directly. "But I've also been saving almost everything I've earned. I knew this was temporary, so I've been preparing. We have enough for first and last month's rent on a decent apartment now." Robert shook his head, smiling slightly. "Always planning ahead. That's what makes you so good at your job." "I've learned to be prepared for when things end," Elena said simply. "Nothing lasts forever. What if it could?" Robert asked. "Last longer, I mean." Elena raised an eyebrow. "Are you offering to extend our arrangement?" "I'm offering to make it permanent," Robert said. "With some changes." "What kind of changes?" Robert took a deep breath. He'd rehearsed this conversation in his mind dozens of times, but now that the moment was here, he felt uncharacteristically uncertain. "I've been looking at my life differently these past months. Before you all came here, I was just existing, working, making money, sleeping, repeating the cycle. There was no joy in it, no purpose beyond accumulating wealth that I never really used." Elena listened quietly, her dark eyes intent on his face. "Having your family here has changed everything. There's life in this house now, laughter, purpose. I've spent more time at home in the past 6 months than I have in the previous 5 years, and I've been happier for it." "So what are you proposing?" Elena asked cautiously. "I'm proposing a more permanent arrangement. I want to set up a proper living trust for the pool house and a section of the grounds. You and your family would have the legal right to live there for as long as you want, regardless of whether you continue working for me." Elena's eyes widened. "Mr. Chen, I'm not finished," Robert said gently. "I also want to establish a college fund for each of the children. Lucia will be ready for college in a few years. She should be able to attend any school she gets into without worrying about cost." Elena stood up abruptly. "Why would you do this?" "We're not your family. We're your employees." "You're more than that," Robert said simply. "You've become the family I never had." Elena looked away, blinking rapidly. "This is too much. We can't accept this." "You can and you will," Robert said firmly. "Consider it an investment in people I believe in. Lucia could change the world with her mind. Thomas might be the next tech genius. Isabel, Matteo, Gabriela. They all have so much potential. I have more money than I could spend in 3 lifetimes. Let me do something meaningful with it." "Have you discussed this with Rosa?" Elena asked. "Not the details, but she knows I wanted to make things more permanent." Elena sat back down, looking overwhelmed. I don't know what to say. Say yes, Robert urged. Not for me, but for them. He nodded toward the pool house, where the children would be returning from school soon. After a long moment, Elena nodded slowly. Yes, for them. Robert smiled, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. Good. My lawyer will draw up the paperwork this week. As they walked back toward the house, Elena asked, What made you like this? So generous? Robert considered the question. I wasn't always this way. For most of my life, I've been focused on just one thing, success measured in dollars. My father was the same. He came from nothing and built a small empire, but he was never satisfied, never happy. I followed in his footsteps, made even more money, and found myself just as empty. He paused, watching a pair of birds chase each other across the lawn. When I found your sister cooking in my kitchen that night, I was angry at first, ready to fire her on the spot. But then I saw how you all lived, working so hard, caring for each other, finding joy despite having so little. It made me question everything. What was the point of all my wealth if I was miserable? What was I saving it for? Elena nodded thoughtfully. Money is important. I know that better than most. But it's not everything. No, Robert agreed. It's not everything. They reached the driveway just as the school bus was dropping off the children. Gabriella spotted them first and came running, her backpack bouncing wildly, a paper clutched in her hand. Mr. Robert, look what I made in school today. She thrust the paper at him proudly. It was a crayon drawing of a large house with many stick figures standing in front of it. This is our house, she explained earnestly, pointing to different figures. This is Mama and Tia Rosa and Lucia and Thomas and Isabel and Mateo and me. She pointed to a taller stick figure standing slightly apart from the others. And this is you because you're part of our family too now. Robert felt something catch in his throat. He knelt down to Gabriella's level. It's beautiful, he said softly. Can I keep it? Gabriella nodded solemnly. I made it for you, to say thank you for saving us from the water monster. Robert laughed, remembering how she'd described the flood that had damaged their old apartment. You're very welcome. The other children were approaching now, calling out greetings. Mateo was eager to show him a science project he'd been working on. Isabel wanted to tell him about scoring 2 goals in her soccer match. Thomas needed help with a computer program he was trying to write. Lucia, quieter than the others, simply smiled at him, a smile that held understanding beyond her years. Robert stood up, Gabriella's drawing still in his hand, and looked at Elena. Family dinner tonight? I have some news to share with everyone. Elena nodded, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. I'll tell Rosa, 7 o'clock? Perfect. As the children pulled him toward the pool house, eager to share their day with him, Robert felt a contentment he hadn't known was possible. 6 months ago, he had been a lonely rich man returning to an empty house. Now he was part of something bigger than himself. Not quite a father. Not exactly an uncle, but definitely family. Later that evening, as they all gathered around the table in the pool house, Mrs. Diaz at the stove putting the finishing touches on dinner, Elena setting out plates, the children chattering excitedly about their day. Robert stood in the doorway for a moment, just watching. This was what his money had bought him in the end. Not the mansion or the cars or the business empire, but this moment. This family that had somehow become his own. This feeling of belonging. Gabriella spotted him and waved enthusiastically. Mr. Robert, come sit by me. I saved you a spot. As he took his place at the table, Robert thought about how differently things might have turned out if he hadn't come home early that night, if he hadn't found Mrs. Diaz in his kitchen. How easy it would have been to react with anger, to fire her on the spot, to miss this chance at happiness. I have something to tell you all, he said once everyone was seated. The table fell quiet, all eyes turning to him expectantly. I've decided that you should stay here in this house permanently, not as guests or employees, but as family. This will be your home for as long as you want it. The children's reactions were immediate and joyful. Cheers, hugs, excited questions. Mrs. Diaz wiped tears from her eyes. Elena reached across the table and squeezed his hand. No words necessary. In that moment, Robert Chen understood something his wealth had never taught him, that the most valuable things in life couldn't be bought. They could only be given freely, with an open heart. And in giving, he had received something priceless in return. The millionaire had come home early and couldn't believe what his maid did. She had inadvertently given him the greatest gift of all, a family,